I'm Patricia Van Skaik, and I'm director of the Lloyd Library and Museum. And I would like to welcome you to tonight's program, Sweet Talk, a discourse on desserts. Looking at the registration list, I see that there are familiar faces. And for those of you that come to the Lloyd Library for programs and for research, welcome back. I also noticed that there are some first-timers on the list and names that I don't recognize. And I'd like to welcome you as well. On the chance that you're not familiar with the Lloyd Library, I'd like to tell you a little bit about it. The Lloyd Library is an independent research library that is free and open to the public. And our focus is primarily on nature, plants, and especially the medicinal use of plants, but not exclusively the medicinal use of plants. We are used by researchers that are interested in nature and plants in basically any way, and that includes people that are environmentalists, scientists, medical practitioners, gardeners, artists, and of course, people that look to plants as nourishment and as comfort and for pleasure. And hence, in that context, we present tonight's program. Typically in the wintertime, we do a food-related program, and we thought this year we could all use a little bit of sweet talk. So we turned to 3 of the best bakers and bakery establishment caterers in town, and asked them to sit down with us tonight and talk to us about their business, their life's work, and so on. So at this point, I would like to introduce our panelists. Hi there. Hello, everybody.
Hi, guys.
I'm going to start with Sharon Butler. Sharon is co-founder and co-owner of the BonBonerie, which is a bakery. They also have a cafe and a catering business. They've been in business for 37 years. In my opinion, they set the gold standard for what a bakery should be. And Sharon, I don't know if you're aware how important your bakery has been to me in my adult life. When I had my first professional job, not too long after you opened, I thought I was really quite grown up and had made it because I could go to this bakery with this French name and I thought I was so sophisticated. Well, we all know that sometimes we think things are really cool when we're young, and then later you sort of look back but that never wavered with the BonBonerie. My husband and my wedding cake came from the BonBonerie. Our child's first, second, third, and several years after that, birthday cakes came from the BonBonerie. And literally, I was there today picking up some baked goods for someone that has COVID. So it just never stopped. And thank you so much. Erica is the owner of Erica Patricia Sweets, and we will learn from her that she has been baking since she was a little girl. I can personally attest to that because she is my next door neighbor, and I have been eating her baked goods for many, many years. I am the lucky beneficiary of mistakes or too much leftovers. And also I know if I call her to borrow a bag of sugar or a cup of sugar, I'm going to definitely get that sugar or butter and usually something else in addition. She's a fabulous, fabulous baker. And I'm really glad to have her with us tonight. Chaske is owner of or co-owner of Brown Bear Bakery. And I pretty much love everything about Brown Bear Bakery, starting with the name. And if any of you follow us on Instagram, or if you don't, I encourage you to, because this week we did some brown bear posts from our collection. So I love the name. I love the space. It's so warm and welcoming. The people that work there are so nice. And the food is addictive. Absolutely. I am one of those folks that on a Saturday morning when I might sleep in a little bit, set my alarm to wake up so I can get my online order into Brown Bear before everything sells out. So again, thank you all so much for being here tonight. So now I want to turn the floor over to you folks and hear from you. I'd like to start out, again, I want to start with Sharon this time, hearing about your journey. Were you always going to be a baker? How did you get to where you are?
Well, you know, it was interesting the other day when Erica and Chaske were talking about their backgrounds, because all three of us, I think, started in the art world. I also have a degree in fine arts, and I think that I love using my hands and my head to solve problems. And I remember being I rented a studio when I graduated from college, and I couldn't stand being alone all the time. I was like, I didn't want to be a painter in a room by myself. And even though when you're in school, you're thinking that's what you might do. And so I ended up getting a job on a whim because I love to bake at a place as a pastry chef. And it just transformed my desire to, it was the right thing for me. So I worked there for 4 years. It was a Northern Italian restaurant here in Cincinnati. And I loved it. And I did that. It survived for about 4 years. And then I moved on and decided I wanted to start my own business, making pastries just for restaurants, because that was my background. So, and we never had a storefront. I met my partner through my brother. She was worked for the welfare department. So neither one of us had trainings in food. We really came to it for a love of food and doing. And I don't think there was as much emphasis on school then, as much as trade and learning from doing. So for 5 years, we rented spaces kind of like gypsies. We were out and we always went to a caterer's and said, can we use your kitchen when you're not there? And then we went to another kitchen over in East Walnut Hills, same thing, until we outgrew it. And finally, we landed on a one-way street in O'Brienville because we didn't care if we had walk-in customers because we were wholesale. And then everything just started growing. So that's how we ended up there. And when you mentioned cakes, just briefly, I feel like celebrations, and we weren't breakfast people, so we liked sleeping in. So we were doing the other end of the food chain, which was the bakery world, which was parties, and it seemed to use more artistic skills that I had. I got to do that even more. So that's how we ended up, and we grew from the cake world into other things, out of just, oh, well, let's make other things. You know, it was not a big business plan, I'll tell you. It was gradual and, as they say, organic. So that's how I got to where I am and right now.
Chaske, I see you nodding a lot. Can you share with us, and are you relating to some of this?
Absolutely, Patricia. And a lot of Sharon's story there, you know, I think resonates with myself and with Blair and with the journey that we had with Brown Bear. You know, as you had alluded to, my background was more in the design world, you know, coming through the DAP program, which is also where I met Blair at when we were at UC together. So she in a lot of ways is really the Brown Bear. She is kind of the guiding force in the baking mind behind it all. So, you know, when she kind of had the spark of inspiration to start doing some markets and kind of testing the waters, you know, after graduating culinary school and you know, having this lifelong passion for baking, I was there kind of along for the ride, and of course to support her. And I think we quickly found out that you know, there's more to running a business than just kind of the baked goods that you produce. And I think that I've always tried to be kind of the yin to her yang, in terms of allowing her to kind of focus on only, I think, what she can do, and trying to kind of remove things from her plate as well. So the idea of this slow and kind of steady organic growth that Sharon was talking about, it's definitely very familiar to us, you know, having started doing just pop-ups in markets, and then having, the one wholesale account, and then two, and kind of growing things very slowly. I definitely can relate to that kind of slow grind with it, and not really jumping ahead to a retail spot until you really feel like you've outgrown all your, kitchens that you can rent, and places that you can kind of borrow time from. So.
Right.
And I wanted to also point out that Chaske is sort of the odd man out in this panel. Erica and Sharon are bakers, and Chaske is the front of house guy. He's the co-owner of Brown Bear Bakery, and Blair, who he mentioned, is the baker. So
absolutely,
that's the yin and the yang he was talking about. Erica, how about you? What's your journey been like?
Well, it's pretty. We like Sharon and Chaske were saying, our journeys were pretty much the same. Yet, when I was a child, I started baking. So I kind of was this creative little kid that had a lot of energy. And instead of, putting me on medication to calm me down, my parents just kind of entertained every whim. So everything that I got into, they encouraged me to do. And I liked baking. When I was young, probably 7 or 8 years old, we became vegetarians. And so, growing up in the 70s and 80s, you had to be very creative in order to have really sweet stuff. I used to watch people eating Snickers bars and brownies, and we didn't get that kind of stuff at home. We made a lot of our food. So that being said, that's kind of how I got my start. And then as far as my journey, I have been less inclined to go towards brick and mortar, just because I liked the freedom of, well, if I want to bake a cake today, I'm going to bake a cake today. And then if I don't feel like baking one for 2 weeks, I'm not going to bake 2 weeks. And then some days I'm baking 2 or 3 cakes, every day. So it's one of those things where I've always kind of honored my independence. And because of that, that's really kind of my journey. And now I've kind of started getting into more like savory, and incorporating savory into some of my sweets. And I am starting my urban garden, and I'm kind of moving some stuff around, and I don't know, maybe one day I will open up a little shop.
So you all three mentioned the art background that you came from, and I have seen and experienced all of what you offer, and it's beautiful and it's gorgeous. And I was going to ask the question, how important is presentation? I'm guessing you would all say it's very important based on what I see coming out of your kitchens, but how do you achieve that high visual appeal?
Practice.
Yeah, practice. I think that people, you have to have it takes a lot of time to have the right, like with icings and stuff, you have to have clarity about what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do to make something beautiful that sits with your product. Like, for a long time, we never ever used any food coloring in anything. Everything had to be like a nut to decorate with because we wanted to be more natural. And then birthday cakes are just, I like pink, somebody wants some color. I graduated from UC, I need some red. And we were like, oh, shoot, well, that didn't work for us. So then we had to take another leap. But I guess the reflection basically of the experience that pastry to me invites you with your eyes, and then it just better tastes good. So, you have to always be aware of fulfilling the seduction, so to speak. That's how I feel about pastry. It must You have to work hard that they're equal, and one is not. That's how I like to make it. One is not dominate the other. That's how my philosophy's kind of always worked.
I definitely would agree with you on that, Sharon. I think that kind of forming a brand in a sense through kind of the aesthetic that you put out with the pastries that you have, I think is important, and kind of understanding what your stylistic kind of tendencies are, perhaps how intricate or how simplistic you want your pastries to look. I think is important because it does help your products to kind of be easily recognizable. And I fully agree with what Sharon is saying, that there is this kind of multi-step process. I almost feel like where you see the pastry, you're attracted to it because it looks beautiful, you're expecting a certain flavor or payoff, so to speak, when you get that pastry. And so I think it's kind of incredibly gratifying when you can kind of marry those two together and provide this really fulfilling experience for the person who's enjoying it.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
I think for me, it more or less, of course, there's an inner perfectionist in me. So it was always this, it just doesn't look right. And of course, oh, it's beautiful, and they're telling you these things, but I'm always thinking there's something else I can do. There's something more I can do, that I can change it. And I think a lot of that came from the structure of being in design school, where every line had to be perfect. Everything had the color, saturation, everything had to be right. And so for me, I think that's I'm my own worst critic when it comes to presentation, and I'm always feeling like I could always take it the next step. But the most important thing for me is that it has to be yummy. And if it's not yummy, then it doesn't matter how it looks.
Yep.
I think the challenge, I also might, and I'm sure Chaske might agree, and you too, Erica, that it also has to work financially, like the size, and you have to worry about the paper that it's presented in. I don't think sometimes our customers know how much thought goes into that little paper that sticks under, or the round you use to present it on, or that kind of stuff is all very conscious, that we have to make these decisions all the time. And you might think, why don't you make that fudge cake in a smaller thing? And it doesn't work. It doesn't taste as good in a small container. So you're limited by the containers to make your perfect product. So there's a whole lot of work that goes into that. I know your lemon squares are long like this, I've had them before and they're delicious, and that's a conscious decision that that's the best way for that to taste. And, there's a lot of that we have to do, I think.
You're totally right, Sharon. And in addition to that too, I think especially over the past, X number of months, 18 months or so, doing primarily carry out stuff, it also adds that additional layer of, you can't just put this on a plate and expect it to be beautiful, but you also have to figure out, how does somebody transport it home without it looking terrible when it arrives? And then also, just does it eat well out of the vehicle that you put it in, because you're not providing that sit down experience.
Yeah, that's a lot of pressure. Go ahead.
All of you mentioned how it has to deliver, not just be beautiful, but it's got to taste good. Do you have a favorite or essential ingredient, or might you even be willing to share with us a secret or surprise ingredient that you sometimes use in your cooking or your baking?
Anybody want to start?
Well, of course, chocolate. Chocolate is what's up. But I am in love with Swiss buttercream right now. So that's
cool.
where I'm at.
Yeah. It's go ahead.
I'm sorry, Sharon. I was going to say, I think to Erica's point, sometimes the best ingredients are not necessarily surprising ones, but more just the quality of the ingredients that you're using, and kind of understanding the difference in spectrum of chocolates, like Erica was saying as well, and then kind of looping back around to Sharon's point of, we want to include this, but can you factor that in budgetarily and make that work as well? So I do think sometimes, just using really great butter and chocolate and quality flours can be almost surprising enough to somebody who's used to, a little more quote unquote generic pastries.
You know, I think too that like when I learned baking and pastry making at the restaurant I was in, that the gentleman that was running it, who was a mentor to me, he loved alcohol, and he loved, and I have like embraced alcohol in my baking, you know, just, it's amazing. And like lemon zest, it's like when you learn that lemon zest is a whole nother level of lemon, you know what I mean? And I think of all the times my mother used that awful lemon juice in the jar, and it's like, it doesn't even taste like a lemon, right? And so all that squeezing, all that extra work, that's a fresh ingredient. And the other part of it was vanilla. My favorite thing in the world is vanilla. I mean, I'm not as big a chocolate Erica lover as a vanilla lover. So, but using good vanilla or vanilla beans, and you can tell such a difference from good and bad. And when you don't put it in, how it changes the flavor of what you're cooking. And something simple, like you said, there's not that many ingredients, but custard or a pastry cream with no vanilla in it, or with vanilla or maybe a shot of rum in it, it's not to make it an alcohol, it's to bring it all together. And I think that's what I've learned. That's what I learned in the from my experience, is it's sort of like salt. That's how I look at some alcohol. It's really not to make it taste like rum. It's just like, oh, what is that? It pulls it together. Yeah.
I would say that all of you offer some really creative products that you can't get the exact same thing anywhere else. And sometimes even things that you wouldn't imagine being together, or using tea for a sweet bar or something like that. Eric, I think about your carrot cake, which I think generally carrot cakes have a bad rep. I don't know what your secret is, but I just want to tell you, if you have a prejudice against carrot cake, you need to eat Erica's. But has there been things that have come about that have been a result of a mistake? Maybe you accidentally added vinegar when you were supposed to be adding wine, or maybe it was just a whim, like you say, this may sound crazy, but what if we put so-and-so and so-and-so, you know, together, and it worked. Do you have examples of that sort of thing?
I think for me, a lot of times I'll think I have something on the shelf and it's not there. And then I'm like, oh snap, I got to find something to substitute it with. I'll just throw a can of Dr. Pepper in there, or I'll, you know, I just start throwing stuff in there and it works. And that, again, it's always really like, how did I forget to get eggs? How did I forget to, you know, why did I start this and not make sure that I had all of my ingredients? And so a lot of times for me, again, it's more or less like, I'll just try this and I pray that it works out. So, and it does. And it's always kind of magical, you know?
Mm-hmm. I think, you know, this is a situation where I'll kind of channel my inner Blair to respond to that. But, you know, at least from my observations with kind of the way that she works, I do think that there's a lot of process involved in terms of having this kind of spark of an idea, and definitely that trial and error of, you know, too sweet, or is this even going to work consistency wise? You know, and so I do think that it's fun to kind of play around with things. And I know that one of the things that she's been enjoying a lot is trying to kind of cross over in terms of applying some savory flavors and techniques, you know, to pastries, which I think can provide some unexpected kind of experiences coming from a bakery as well.
That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
I guess for me, I really more a different way I approach things was like, I really was unhappy, for instance, with the icing that would go on wedding cakes, and it tasted bad, especially when I was getting started. And I thought I couldn't, when nothing was there, no recipe was there to say this would be a good thing and try it, because let's face it, a lot of what the history of pastry goes way back, and some things are just perfect, like, you know, oh shoot, I can't think of the name, but anyway, puff pastry. It's like making that is, you don't want to mess with it too much. It's perfect if you do it right. So I think there's other things that we've done that we've had to create to solve a problem. And so it was a different approach than accidentally putting things together, but like more like working hard at putting things together to solve a problem. And so that's kind of what's forced us to come up with some original ideas, especially like, let's say our icing on our wedding cakes. I think like it's been a really good thing for us to use on many different occasions, but it's a complicated recipe that took a lot of time to figure out.
So Sharon mentioned having a baking
good.
mentor. So where do you guys go to, and Chaske, maybe you can speak a little bit for Blair here too. Where do you go for inspiration, recipes? Did she and do the two of you have a guru, a baking mentor, somebody, that place you go, or that person that?
I would say, Patricia, that, one, she has this kind of innate passion for it, from her grandparents and her grandma and her mom. I guess moving onwards to present day, man, with the social media and the internet, the interconnected quality of bakeries and bakers is so broad now. So I definitely know that she has a lot of friends, quote unquote, that are baker friends in other cities or at other bakeries. And I think there's a lot of inspiration for her to be found, in what they're doing, or kind of what other, seasonal flavors are on the precipice of coming into the bakery. So I think there's a lot of inspiration to be found, and kind of like, an artist, you go through different phases and periods, and you might have different interests at different times. So I do think there is a lot of kind of crossover with how, one might find inspiration as an artist as well.
I don't know that I think I would agree with that. I pull from everywhere. I just pull from everywhere in terms of inspiration. And sometimes for me, it's kind of the same thing, like again, I would apply like design principles, like with color. Like sometimes it's always like, people think, oh, that's not going to go together, that's not going to work, but it does work. And I start trying to push it a little bit, like, oh, okay, I think, today I'm inspired. I just bought all of this rhubarb, so I'm going to do something with this rhubarb. I don't know exactly what it is. Let me try maybe sorbet. Maybe I'll try ice cream. Maybe I'll make a drink. Maybe I'll, so there are a number of things that I will play with. And in terms of like, trying to find that right flavor. And again, there's sometimes, it's kind of tart, so I'll put a little bit of sweet, but I'll change it. I'll put this, maybe I'll add a little mint, maybe I'll add this, and it might work, it might not work. And I think that's, a lot of times I think I'm more inspired just by, visually, like if I see something and I say, oh, okay, I'm going to try and make something out of this. It's kind of like, a sculpture, I'm going to try and make something out of this, and maybe it'll work and maybe it won't.
When you were talking about that, Erica, it made me think about how important the training in the arts are too, because we're used to failing. You don't win at first. And there's a lot of people I notice that come into the bakery that are going to work for us, and they think like that if they have a failure, that's a bad thing. You know what I mean? That you have to experiment to get to the perfect recipe. That's the way I feel. It's like people think, oh, you just made up that thing. I was like, no, we did not. It took a lot of time to make that just right. And that's the science of baking. To me, is exquisite to be able to replicate something sometimes with that kind of skill. It's like it's very much like, the hand of an artist that can repeat something. And I think it's not easy. And it's part of the, if you like that, which I think art artists do. We're not all about creating like this and this all the time. It's perfecting, right? And that's really interesting that's been interesting for me. I just, that's an unexpected result of how we do our business,
I totally see what you're saying in Blair as well, Sharon, in terms of, each pastry is a sculpture and an opportunity to make it as perfect as you see it in your mind. And I think that, it creates a level of quality that you expect and a lot of pride in what you're creating as well.
It does.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to shift to some of the things that you offer in your respective places. First of all, I want to know, what is your most popular item? I can guess sometimes because it's the thing that sells out, or maybe I think it's the thing I always want. So first of all, what's your most popular item? And then, is that your favorite item, or is there something that you really love at your place that maybe you would be hopeful that other people would like as much as you do?
Now that's a good question about people liking what you might like, because you know what, I like the plainest cookies in the world. I just like a cookie that's right out of the oven. I feel like it's the most spoiled thing is to have something freshly baked. But of course, we've developed our apple cream is a very popular cake. Our scones are very popular, and our cookies have really developed into a really rich, I feel like, opportunity, because they're small and they're not the big cake, but they're these little things that are complete in themselves. And I love a cookie. I just love it. And I've always loved tea, and it seems like a cookie or a scone goes great with that. I lean more towards that personally, but people love our decorated cookies because it's fun. And that's really what I want to have happen for children too, that it's fun and joyful, but it still tastes good. So I would say that our cutout cookies are also very popular that way.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Erica. I was going to say probably our most popular sustained item would still be our cinnamon roll. That's been something we got a little notoriety for early on at the bakery, and I think a lot of people came to try it and have kind of fallen in love with it. I think more recently it's been really nice to see kind of more of a balance in terms of the inventory that we're able to sell, and people kind of branching out, I think, or willing to add on to perhaps the cinnamon roll that they get every week. So a lot of our seasonal croissants and the laminated program have been doing really well, which I think is a lot of fun for us as well. Personally, it's funny because one of the things that I eat the most from our menu is the nibby brownie, and I think that it in a lot of ways is equally as chocolatey and different consistency than the salty chocolate chip. But it's funny because I often share that with customers, and it continues to be an item that kind of lags on our menu at times. So it is often there waiting for people that are perhaps late to the bakery in the day. So I continue to love it and pick up the slack if there's a couple left at the end of the day.
I get that really well.
Yeah.
Well, so for me, I've of course got two. My favorite, of course, is something that I very rarely ever sell or make, and I like the tarte tatin. That's my favorite, but it's not a money maker. So brownies, I make these salted caramel brownies that are very popular. And then of course my carrot cakes, my cakes, spice cake. And again, I'm always experimenting with different types of cakes, but the most popular that I have and that people request is the carrot cake.
I need some of those brownies, Erica.
Okay, I got you.
Yeah.
So I promised our panelists that, and they've all mentioned it, or at least a couple have, that we would also talk savory, because each one of them does have some savory offerings from their establishments. And Chaske, I try to keep it balanced. You'll notice my orders are like a chocolate chip cookie and a brioche, a goat cheese brioche or something like that.
Right.
So tell me about savory and tell me how that fits in. And
Sure. Yeah, it's funny, you know, the brioche that you were just talking about, Patricia, is one that I can remember Blair kind of testing in our apartment in Oakley, you know, back in 2010. So the idea of having savory and being really interested in savory, I think, has always been something, you know, kind of on her radar and in her world. You know, our menu had a cheddar chive scone on it when we opened up in OTR. You know, the savory brioche was not far behind it, and so I think. For her, I can kind of speak for her. I think that it's always been very satisfying to be able to offer a savory component to complement that sweet. And, you know, so that's always been important, I think, to us. And it's continued onward with, you know, like the everything bagel croissant that we're doing right now, and focaccia and things of that nature. So it is funny. I love to kind of make light of that when I give people their orders, when I see they have savory and sweet, you know, and kind of finding that balance. So definitely something we take a lot of pride in and really enjoy offering on our menu.
And Chaske, can you tell us a little bit about some of those ingredients and some of the things that you use in your more savory products?
Sure. It was funny today. We returned to what we call Onion Day, which is kind of a weekly day at the bakery where we're caramelizing a ton of onions. So that is a huge component to, you know, some of the savory offerings like the savory brioche. I also, as I kind of mentioned earlier, I think Blair kind of used savory as this opportunity to kind of draw people in perhaps new directions or flavors that they have not experienced before. So using flavors like garam masala or cumin or togarashi or things like that, I think allow you to kind of embrace the seasons. And after you've gained some confidence, I think from your customers, they might be willing to kind of go out with you and try things that they might not be familiar with as well.
Yeah. I guess for me and savory, I had the most fun and luck of hiring a woman that was French actually, and Jocelyn, and her father was a chef that used to travel across transcontinental. He was the chef that would be the chef across the board. And she would just tell her lovely stories. So she used to wait at the counter. And then she said, you know, I'd really like to bake. And so we said, well, what would you like to bake? She goes, let me make quiche. And so she started making her quiche. That was the recipe that her father taught her. And that quiche recipe has stayed a staple for BonBonerie for 20 years. It's not like some other quiches. It's not a real thick quiche. It's shallow and it's just a delicate little crisp crust. And I think that, and we changed that around with different fillings and vegetables and things. And that really has been one of our most important savory. That's how we launched into savory. Really, it was our first voyage into that. And then as the cafe opened, of course, it gave us a lot more opportunity. So that's like a whole nother world that I don't look at that much. I let them like pursue interesting recipes down there. And it's not as much bakery as it is sandwiches and things like that. So we aren't really focused that deeply. Bread baking in our place does not work. It needs a lot of space and a different oven and control of temperature. And it's not for us. We did it one for a while. In fact, some of you I know Shadow Bakery. When he came to New York, he started at BonBonerie and baked for us for 2.5 or 3 years before he started his place. And then we were like, Bill, no, you gotta go. We can't have bread everywhere. And then we bump it and with a cake or it goes vice versa. And it was just, like, wasn't a marriage that was made in heaven after he started getting really good at it. So, or he started making, we had a following for it anyway. So that's our savory story.
For me, really, a lot of times I like to experiment with jams. And in my jams, I do incorporate a lot of like peppers, I do put onions. I put, and it's really weird, but I put a lot of different herbs in my jams, and I put them on the cakes, and they are yummy. They taste good for some
That's
reason.
cool.
They work out. So, and again, it's that all of that experimenting. I have like a lot of chutneys. I would make samosas all of the time, and so I would make different types of chutneys, and I was always trying to push the envelope with the flavors. And adding, like, sometimes I put peach in there, some cranberries, and then onion and habanero, and it was awesome. And so then I started putting them on the cakes, and they taste great.
That's
So
cool. That's really neat.
I don't really go, I don't do like biscuits and breads or anything like that. But in terms of, I do try to add unconventional ingredients into a lot of my stuff in order to definitely create a different type of flavor.
Mhm. That's great.
Oh my gosh, I am so hungry. I don't want to focus on the negative, but I've always found this informative when I ask at a sweets pan or on a cooking panel. Last year I asked or maybe it was the first year, the soup panelists, what's the biggest mistake you can make? And they all said the same thing, and that is too much salt. This was for soups. They're like, you can always come in and add salt at the end, but if you put too much in at the beginning, you're done. Is there a mistake that people typically make when they're baking that you want to caution them to avoid?
I personally would say, quit handling your pastry so much. Handling dough is so terrible. Cookie dough, almost every dough, you must follow the directions. Don't pretend that the temperature doesn't matter. It does. All of those things are really important. And watch and understanding the language of stirring it. Like my mom used to teach me, like stirring like creme anglaise until it covers the back of a spoon. You have to have somebody show you that, because it's very hard to know. It's like somebody teaching themselves to sew. It's a lot longer. You need to really listen to the wisdom of bakers before you, because it's a really long cumulative amount of information that you can learn from. And I think some experimentation, it just doesn't work. There's things that do work, but flour and butter and stuff kind of goes together in a good way. After like hundreds of years, it's the right amount. So experimentation is wonderful, but there's some things you shouldn't experiment with. I mean, it's just kind of perfection. I always think puff pastry is one of them. It's absolutely perfect. And Danish doughs and things like that. But that's my advice.
I would, definitely agree with all of that, Sharon, especially from what I've seen and from what I've learned. I think, as a non-baker, I kind of have a different experience with it. But one thing I have picked up on is kind of the level of sweetness that a lot of bakers have. And in terms of kind of understanding that threshold of, when are your teeth tingling, it might be a little bit, time to dial it back. But also kind of finding that balance, because of course, inherently you want to make sweet pastries oftentimes as a baker. So I do think sometimes the idea that a pastry has to be sweet, let's go hard on the sugar, can be something that is easy to kind of go overboard with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true too.
Mm-hmm.
So I like the handling. The biggest thing I always found myself always anxious when you're like baking a cake is wanting to touch the cake, before it's actually ready to come out of the oven.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that's the biggest mistake you could ever make in life, because that means you might be making another cake.
Yeah.
So again, it's patience. Honestly, a lot of times it's, okay, if your recipe tells you 30-35 minutes, don't go in 27 minutes and wreck the whole thing because you could. Another thing that someone imparted to me, I remember making a genoise once, and I didn't put butter in it because I didn't want it. It made me nervous. I didn't want it to fall, and so I didn't make it with butter. And of course, they told me butter makes everything better. And although it came out perfect, it was not as buttery and yummy as it could be. So that's one of the butter makes everything better, y'all.
Agreed. That's funny. I think also the temperature thing is important because it might save 30 minutes, but don't really think 30 minutes is always exactly right. It might take 36 minutes in your oven. So some people take it, they're like literal. It's a hard thing to know that, but you have to understand your own oven before you start baking. If it's too hot or whatever, just pay attention to that.
I was going to say, Sharon, I think it's an interesting blend of kind of patience and experience, in terms of understanding what to look for and what the signs are. And, if, oh my gosh, my caramel is crystallized, I didn't realize what that looked like until I actually did it. And then learning the next time of how to kind of dial in the temperature. But also to your point, realizing that ovens can run hot and cold and that you might have to really be mindful of it and not just set the timer and walk back to it when it goes off and expect it to all be perfect.
Yeah, true enough.
So before we open it up to questions for the audience, are there any parting sweet thoughts that any of you have to say or questions that you have for each other?
No. I just anybody who's interested in baking, I definitely encourage them to, it's like we were saying in terms of it's not always going to be, everything's not going to come out perfect, and you just have to, it's always about practice, and it's keep on trying. And if the one way doesn't work, you might find another way that actually works better. And again, it's like, just don't give up. Like, don't say I can't bake a thing. You can bake. Everyone can bake. You just have to keep doing it and keep trying. And I also encourage people to, throw extra ingredients in the pot and see what it tastes like.
I guess my advice is to, if you're a new baker, instead of going and just getting random recipes out, is to find one cookbook and make 4 or 5 kinds of cookies and see if that person really knows what they're talking about, or you like what happens when you've made them. And then you've got somebody to believe in when you're baking. I mean, that's for me, it was really important to get started on a chef or pastry chef that I loved. And someone gave me the book randomly, but it ended up being good. But I really like that idea sometimes when you're beginning. Just one book, just start one person's philosophy and read it and follow through on that and see what kind of baker, you understand the mind of a baker too. And the work it used to take to become a pastry chef is it wasn't small to write a cookbook. It was a big ordeal, right? So
I think in kind of building off of that with what Sharon was saying, just having that passion and kind of trying to understand the fundamentals of baking and actually what you're doing at a chemical level or just kind of the cause and effect of things, even as a non-baker, I think would be really helpful for somebody starting to dive in, so that you're not necessarily just replicating the steps that you're reading in a recipe, but you're understanding, why you're adding that ingredient, or, what that part of the recipe is actually doing for your final product. And I think, once you kind of start to grasp how to apply those, that, then you can start to be, a little more of your own baker, where you can apply those in novel ways or ways that are unique to you or kind of fit your style.
I agree.
So I think we're going to turn it over now to questions from the audience. One of the questions that somebody asked for was all of your web addresses and contact information. And Aaron, who is our technology librarian behind the screens, posted that information on the chat section. So, and I think we could probably get that out to folks by email too. So if the participants, the attendees here go to the chat section, you'll get that contact information. We do have a couple of questions. One is from Kelly. What's a mistake that you made in business and or baking that taught you something valuable?
Boy, so many.
I guess, well, I think one thing that came to mind off the top of my head is the power of planning and forethought and kind of proactivity with things. You know, especially once you're in a bakery setting where you're producing pastries at a little bit of a larger scale, you know, you certainly don't have the chance to get, you know, a certain amount of butter or flour or something like that just on a whim. So I do think the idea of thinking a week ahead or continuing to look down the path or even at the next season is something that we learned pretty quickly, especially as we were trying to kind of continue to grow to meet the demand.
I think for me, it was initially when I started, I took on too much business, like, you know, too soon, took on too much too soon. And it kind of, you burned me out a little bit. And so I had to figure out how to kind of dial it back, you know, and honor, I guess, a balance, a life work balance kind of thing. And so like I said, I had no inclination of, you know, doing a brick and mortar, and I do more custom, you know, orders as opposed to, you know, going full on and saying to everyone, oh yeah, my books are open. Let's, you know, let's book everything. Because I found myself, you know, overworked. And so that's probably one of the biggest mistakes I made. And I learned from it. And of course, you know, you grow from it. And I'm so much happier now.
I mean, I think when I was starting, I'd say yes to everything.
Right.
Too, like you said, but it was stuff I didn't know, and I thought I could solve it. And I made customers unhappy because they would say, could I, I remember one cake, somebody wanted me to make them a cake that looked like a groundhog. And I was like, okay, Groundhog's Day, I'll do it. You know what I mean? I was always saying yes, because I thought I could solve every problem. And I remember him coming and he just was like, that's the worst thing I've ever seen in my whole life. I said, you're right. I said, you don't have to buy it and you don't have to take it. And I thought, you've got to stop and know what you're creating, what you're doing. That's the biggest business. Who am I? I'm not the big savory bakery of the world. I am a pastry shop that makes cookies and things like that. I have to identify myself. I spread myself out making too many kinds of products. That was a learning curve. And I wanted to make everything in the world until I had to refine it and know identify what kind of business I was really.
So going back, or Chaske, was there something you want to say?
Not specifically, but
okay.
You know, I would surely agree with both of what Sharon and Erica were saying. You know, I think that it's incredibly empowering, you know, that first time that you do turn something down and you realize the payoff, you know, it wasn't horrible and you survived and it was okay. Can be just really empowering, and I think kind of reinforce, you know, take the work that you want to do, you know, put the fruit out that you want to sell, and kind of focus in on what you really enjoy doing.
Mm-hmm. Well said.
Thank you.
So going back to testing and getting things right, Joseph asked, how many successive versions of an item will you make to get it just like you want it?
Just as many as it takes.
I'm
afraid that's the answer.
There yet.
Yeah. I've made 50 variations of something before, at least, I'm sure, you know, before it was right.
It's funny. I joke with Blair. I think sometimes like with apps, you have like big versions and then you have subversions even to that too. And I think that, I joke with her sometimes that you'll have, oat cookie version 2.1.3, because there is so much small tinkering that you can do under the hood. Even if you have the right cookie, maybe you want to refine the chocolate, or you want, a different type of flour or oat in there. So, definitely a lot of kind of refinement that continues to go on.
Well, and I do just want to offer myself up if any of you need a taster.
Okay.
But David wants to know, do you like baking shows like the Great British Baking Show, and comments that sometimes those shows stresses him out?
I never watch them ever. I don't. I just don't want to. I don't know why. I just don't. I don't know why, but I never do watch them, or any cooking shows, honestly.
I think we run kind of hot and cold with it, where we'll be into a season and we might watch it over the course of a week, and then sometimes you honestly want to get away from that sort of thing, and you've been at the bakery all day, and one of the last things you want to do is watch more baking and more breakdowns. It's funny, my perspective as a non-baker is unique, of course, watching those shows sitting or like next to a pastry chef, and it is fun to kind of fan out at times and almost be like, hey, how are they doing that, or have you made that recipe before? So I enjoy them kind of as a spectator myself, especially with the connection that I have to a baker.
I'm the same way. I kind of run hot and cold. There's some days where I will just like binge watch, like Chopped or something like, something like that. I'll watch like nonstop episodes, and then, I won't watch for months. So it just depends on, I guess if I'm feeling it, or I'm shuffling through the guide and I see something that, stands out, say, oh, that's kind of interesting. Let me watch that. And then it just starts rolling into more episodes and more episodes. And it's almost like background music, Yeah.
I guess I would like to say that I did watch old Julia Childs not too long ago. And that I love, because I kept looking at her kitchen and how much she got done in that funny, crazy kitchen. And I love that she used weird tools. And I'm like, that's the way people cook. And some of the new stuff is so perfect. And they have a little, like a small thing this big that will have just salt in it. She's grabbing salt, and that's the way people cook. And I think that's kind of why I don't watch it. I think, I don't know, it's hard sometimes how perfect it all is, I suspect.
I think one really cool byproduct I've seen at the bakery, as somebody who interacts primarily with customers, has been a renewed interest, or at least a lot of younger people and children even, that are really interested in baking. And I assume it's a product of, Great British Baking Show or things like that. But a lot more requests over the last couple of years for, can my kid come in and watch you guys bake, or just kind of interest like that. So broadly speaking, I think that's might be a really fun kind of byproduct to have more people potentially interested in that at a younger age as well.
Well, I want to thank you three this evening. This has been fabulous. I know that I've learned some things that I'll try, and if all else fails, I know where to go to still get the good stuff. I want to thank the audience for coming this evening. I would like to point out that the programs and services that we offer are made possible in part by Lloyd Library membership. So I would encourage attendees to take a look at that. You can find more information on our website, which is www.lloydlibrary.org. I also encourage you to watch us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Our Instagram feed is especially popular. I also want to point out that tonight's program will be available in a couple of days on YouTube. So if you know somebody that missed it or want to watch it again, and certainly to any of our panelists, if you want to share it, you are welcome to. So we're very excited about that. Keep an eye out for more programs that we have coming, food related and otherwise. And again, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you guys. We appreciate it.